This really happened to me. I'm telling it exactly as it unfolded because it still scrapes my nerves raw to remember the sound a lock makes when it closes on something you love. The chain bit my palms as I grabbed the steel gate my neighbor had dragged across my driveway, right there under the paper lanterns of our 4th of July block cookout on Avenue 50 in Highland Park. People were gathered with plastic cups and lawn chairs as he lifted a champagne flute and snapped a fat brass padlock through the links, announcing to everyone, "This access is closed forever." Grease hissed on the grill, and sparklers fanned the twilight while I stood in the dust of my own driveway, humiliated, his smirk reflecting back at me from the chrome of my car's bumper. He knew exactly what he was doing because he planned the party as cover and he wanted the witnesses. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Eleanor Russo, Ellie to friends, and I am 62 years old, a retired set decorator who left the union grind after 40 years of making fake living rooms look like real ones. The little bungalow I live in isn't grand, but it sits behind a row of pre-war craftsman homes tucked at the end of a flag lot stem that looks like a driveway, but is actually older than most of the houses on the block. It was my Aunt Lila's place. 2 sycamores, a wraparound porch deep enough for a glider, and a lane barely wide enough for one car running from the street along the fence line to my garage. For my entire childhood, we called it the runway, because every Christmas my cousins and I would tape tinfoil stars to the fence and pretend Santa was landing. When Aunt Lila died, I inherited the house, along with her bad plumbing, and a folder of yellowing papers tied with a brittle ribbon. I moved in the spring before the 4th, painting the porch a color called ocean fog and planting rosemary along the lane. My neighbor out front, Derek Vale, bought his place 6 months earlier, a flipped craftsman with a square of new sod and a contractor sign that never seemed to come down. Derek was in his late 30s, a developer who loved telling people he did entitlement work, which I learned was a phrase that somehow meant both paperwork and swagger. He had a sleek wife, Sloane, who wore white linen and a gold pendant the size of a hockey puck, and he had a habit of parking his black F-150 right over the mouth of my lane. The first time, I left a note, "Please leave access clear. This driveway serves the back house," with a smiley face. The second time, I knocked on their door with a plate of lemon bars. By the third time, Derek answered shirtless and sweaty, holding a nail gun as if that excused the truck angled like a wall across my way. "This is my frontage," he said, as if frontage was a religion. "You can go around the block and park on Avenue 51. "There is no around," I said, because the bungalow had no alley and no second access, just the lane. He laughed in a way that made me feel small, like he was looking at something he intended to move with a skid steer. I called 1-800-ASK-LAPD for a courtesy conversation. The operator told me kindly that if it wasn't a red curb and there wasn't a sign, their hands were tied. So I bought a sign, "Do not block driveway." I sunk it into the ground with a little cement, and because I'm me, I painted a floral border around the black letters. The next morning it was gone. I found it later in the gutter a block away, bent like a question mark. Derek invited everyone to a patriotic block cookout on the 4th. He had 2 folding tables of food, Trader Joe's salads decanted into his own bowls, and a Bluetooth speaker thumping country hits. Sloane fluttered like a hostess in a magazine shoot. I brought Aunt Lila's potato salad in a blue bowl with a chip on the rim. People toasted the neighborhood, and I almost forgot that Derek had parked the F-150 across my lane again, leaving just enough room to make a point, but not enough to pass. It was when the sun slid behind Mount Washington and the first illegal firework cracked in the distance that Derek wheeled out the gate. It was a welded rectangle of steel tube with a chain-link panel, painted safety yellow, like it was born to boss people around. The wheels squealed on the concrete as he dragged it from his side yard and skated it across my lane in plain view of half the block. He slipped the chain through eye bolts drilled into the curb and clicked the padlock. The sound was tiny and obscene. "You don't have an easement," he said to me, loud enough for the crowd, "and this is not your driveway." My mouth went dry. It has been my driveway since before I was born. "Show me," he said, that smile like an Instagram ad you can't skip. I did what people do when they're 50 yards from City Hall and still can't get justice. I called a friend. Javier across the street works nights as a paramedic and has the patience of a saint. He put his plate down and walked over, slow like a man walking toward a snake. "Derek," he said, "you can't block emergency access. If an ambulance needs to reach the back, this is the only way." Derek lifted his flute, bubbles glinting in the porch light. "Then they can knock on my door nicely and I'll unlock it." "Unless you're not home," Javier said. "I'm always home," Derek said, and the way he squared his shoulders made me feel like the ground decided to tilt. The neighbors turned their chairs. I could feel the weight of the eyes, the already forming opinions. She's new. He's confident. Maybe she is confused. "I have papers," I said. "Old papers." It came out sounding like a grandmother's curse. "Then go fetch them." He clinked his glass with the padlock, and the laughter that followed was worse than the lock. Sloane smoothed her dress. "Ellie, don't make this weird," she said, in the voice of someone who has never known what it is to row against a current. I went back through the gate to my bungalow, past the rosemary I had planted when I still believed in small beauty as a shield. I took down the ribbon-tied folder Aunt Lila had kept in the china cabinet and laid the deeds and maps on my dining table. The maps were hand-inked, curls of calligraphy that said track number 3492, with little squares like teeth. A pencil line showed the lane along the fence. Some dusty notary had stamped a date before color film was common. By the time I came out again, Derek had affixed a printed sign to the gate, "Private property. No thoroughfare. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The sign was so crisp, it was as if he'd had it printed days ago. People were eating licorice ropes and pretending not to stare. I held up a map. "This shows the lane," I said. "My aunt used it for 60 years. Derek's smile widened a notch. "Not good enough," he said. "No recorded easement, no right." He nodded to his contractor friend, who filmed me on his phone as if I were a wildlife documentary. "This," Derek said, tapping the padlock with a finger, "is now a legal boundary." I felt something important slip in my chest, like a gear losing a tooth. I am not a crier, but my eyes stung. There's a particular humiliation that lives behind your ribs when you can't enter your own home without someone's permission, and he was enjoying it like a dessert. Javier moved between us. "Unlock it," he said. "Now." "Call the police," Derek said. "Let's let them decide." The patrol car rolled up with weary resignation. 2 officers who looked like they'd already worked too many fireworks calls. They were polite, and they were careful. They were very sorry, but it was a civil matter. "If there isn't a posted easement in the records, ma'am, we can't force him to move the gate," the older one said. "You might need to take it to court." "Court?" I heard how small my voice sounded. "Civil court," he said. "Stanley Mosque, downtown." Derek signed something on a clipboard like a man christening a boat. When the officers left, he pocketed the key and with theatrical gentleness lifted my potato salad off the table and handed it to me. "Take care, Ellie," he said. "It's a new world. Don't get hurt in it." I slept on the couch that night with a knot of anger in my throat. In the morning, I parked on Avenue 51, shouldered my grocery bags like a mule, and walked the block in the heat to reach my own porch. A parking ticket fluttered on my windshield when I returned. Street sweeping, 10 a.m. to noon on Wednesdays. Derek watched from his porch, shirtless again, a stoneware mug held like a chalice. He didn't wave. "You have to understand, I have spent a lifetime arranging other people's furniture to look like Grace. I know how to make a living room feel like a hug. I understand the difference between a prop and an heirloom, but I didn't know how to unfasten a lock that was less metal than malice. The envelope came 2 days later by certified mail, a cease and desist letter from an attorney whose letterhead looked like a Swiss ski resort. It accused me of encroachment, of tortious interference with quiet enjoyment, and, more chillingly, it threatened an application for a restraining order if I persisted in attempting to utilize the private driveway. Private. My driveway reduced to an adjective. I stood in my kitchen with that letter in my hands and felt the old house listen. Aunt Lila's walls had ears, and I swear I could hear the ghosts of every family dinner served here, every midnight laugh, every scrape of chair leg on wood. I put the letter on the counter next to the blue bowl and decided I would not be bullied out of my own past. I picked up my keys and headed for downtown to find someone who could read the language of land better than I could. But before I got 2 blocks, I saw the orange notice stapled to my fence, a code enforcement citation for overheight vegetation and unpermitted shed. The rosemary hadn't grown taller than my shin. The shed had been Aunt Lila's since 1973. I looked across the street. Derek, immaculate in a fresh white t-shirt, bowed slightly from his porch as if we were on a stage together and he'd just delivered my cue. I took the bus to Hill Street because my car was boxed in by his truck. Inside the Stanley Moss Courthouse, I followed the smell of copier toner to the civil clerk's window and felt, for the first time in a long career of faking reality, completely out of my depth. The clerk gave me a number and a pamphlet and the advice that sits at the center of this story like a bone. Records don't lie, ma'am. Paper outlives bullies. I tucked the pamphlet into my purse like a talisman and promised myself I'd make the paper talk. The only question was how deep I'd have to dig, and whether I'd find what I needed before Derek made good on his threat to lock me out, not just with steel and chain, but with a court order that would turn my home into a memory. And on the very morning I planned to begin the search, a deputy in a beige uniform knocked on my door and slid a packet into my hand, an application for a temporary restraining order, hearing set for the following week, because Derek Vale had told the court I was trespassing on his property every time I took a step onto the lane. I stared at the date, the courtroom number, and the declaration with my name, and the only thought that fit in my skull was this: if I don't find the truth in time, I will lose the path to my own front door. I folded the papers and made a list. Courthouse, county recorder, city engineer, anyone who knew where roads begin and end. I laced my shoes and went out, angry enough to be brave, but not yet sure the ground under my feet still belonged to me at all. I didn't bring an attorney to the restraining order hearing because I couldn't afford to hire one yet. I brought a binder. It was an old prop from a police procedural I worked on in the 90s, half the tabs still labeled in fake cases, but the metal rings worked. I filled it with copies from the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder on Imperial Highway, where the room smells like microfilm and despair, and where a woman named Marta, with the calm hands of a librarian, taught me how to pull track maps like a magician pulling scarves from a hat. Marta was a retired city surveyor who worked the counter since her husband passed. "Developers bank on people not understanding the plat," she said, placing a magnifying glass on my map. "You've got track number 3492, recorded in 1926. See that dashed line along the lots? That's a proposed right-of-way. Sometimes they build them, sometimes they don't. Paper streets, we call them." "Paper streets," I said, "like roads that exist only in ink." "Until someone makes them real," she said, tapping a box that read IOD, Irrevocable Offer of Dedication. The owner promises to dedicate a strip for public use if the city ever accepts it. And if the city never accepts it? "It sits like a ghost," she said, "but it's still there." She showed me a cabinet with hundreds of tiny drawers, each labeled with track numbers and inked names of vanished companies. I slid open the one for mine and found a copy of a 1979 document, the kind of thing that smells like old basement, an irrevocable offer to dedicate 20 feet along the eastern edge of Lot 6, Derek's lot, to the city of Los Angeles for future street or driveway access. The grantor was a man named Fenster, same name as the old woman who used to wave at kids from the porch. The city had never accepted it, no stamp, no council file number, but the offer was recorded, and it ran with the land. Marta leaned back. Sometimes those offers get accepted when there's a reason, she said. Like, say, a landlocked parcel in the rear that needs legal access. Like my house, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Like your house, she said. Armed with this ghost road and my hope, I rode the elevator at the Stanley Mosque to Department 47, where the judge in a pewter robe listened to Derek's attorney describe me as a serial trespasser with a history of harassment who intimidated a young family. He gestured toward Sloane, who dabbed her eyes with a tissue that, unless my set decorator eye failed me, had a little sequin sewn in. I tried to speak plain. Your Honor, the driveway has served the back home since the 1950s. I have an elderly dog and bad knees. There is no alley. If he keeps this gate, I can't live. The judge's hands steepled. Do you have a recorded easement? I have an irrevocable offer of dedication along his frontage and a track map with a proposed right-of-way, I said, holding up my binder like it was going to sing. Derek's attorney spread his hands. Proposed, Your Honor. Ghost paperwork. The city never accepted it. In the meantime, my client's safety and privacy are paramount. The judge sighed the way men sigh when they've been taught to fear making headlines. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order that prohibits both parties from harassing each other, he said, and I'm setting a hearing on the access issue for 30 days. In the meantime, Ms. Russo, I'm not ordering that the gate be removed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a civil access dispute, not a criminal matter. Derek's smile, small and private, found me in that crowd and held like a thumb on a bruise. I walked out into the August heat with the binder growing heavier by the block. Something in me wanted to sit on the steps and cry. Instead, I sat on the bench by Grand Park's fountain, dialed Marta from the recorder's office, and said, Teach me how to make a ghost road live. Start with Zimas, she said. The city's zoning map. Type your address. Then look for council files about street dedications and vacations near your tract. And call Public Works, Bureau of Engineering. Ask for whoever handles our permits and street acceptances. Be polite. Bring cookies. I went home, baked from a box because I was raised to arm myself with offerings, and stacked the cookies on a plate wrapped in plastic. The next morning I took them to the Public Works building on North Figueroa Street, where the lobby smells like floor wax and waiting. A man named Ray Delgado, with a mustache like a vintage postcard, met me at the counter. He listened as I laid out my paper and my worry. I know that tract, he said, surprising me. Half of Highland Park is full of old offers of dedication. People forget, until they don't. He flipped my map. If your neighbor's frontage lines up with the IOD and your parcel has no alley access, the Board of Public Works can consider accepting the offer. Takes a council motion sometimes. Takes a reason. I have a reason, I said. He locked me out of my life. Ray nodded. Document everything. Photos, dates, complaints, deliveries denied. Fire department loves a good access story. If we can show public interest and safety, and if the council office is willing, this isn't impossible. I walked out holding a business card like it was a spare key. I turned on Avenue 50 and saw a new sign zip-tied to Derek's gate. No access. Court order pending. The audacity of announcing a thing that hadn't been granted yet made my stomach flip. I lifted my phone and took photos. I took photos of the Rosemary. I took photos of my dog, Daisy, looking at me from the porch with her head cocked like a question mark. That night, long after the blocks quieted and the cats owned the fences, a manila envelope slid under my door. Inside was a glossy brochure for Derek's development company, Valescent Properties, steel and glass renderings of future homes with captions about revitalizing underutilized spaces. A sticky note in his handwriting said, "Everything is negotiable." I turned the note over and wrote, "So is patience." and slid it back under his gate, where it fell with a papery whisper that sounded like a curtain coming down. The next morning, a blue van from code enforcement crawled by. The officer got out, measured my rosemary with a ruler, and took a photo of my shed. He handed me another notice, a hearing in 2 weeks for nuisance vegetation. I looked at the notice and then at Derek's porch. He didn't wave. He didn't have to. He had started a war and called it compliance. I pressed my palm to one of the sycamores till the bark pressed back like an old friend's hand. I asked Aunt Lila out loud, "What would you do?" The wind moved in the leaves like breath. I took it as an answer, and I called a lawyer. Naomi Chen's office is in a repurposed storefront on Figueroa, where the paint still remembers being a payday loan place. She's in her 40s, with the kind of calm that makes people confess. Her diploma from UCLA Law hung between 2 framed maps of the city of Los Angeles, one a modern GIS printout, the other a 1909 plat with ink that looked almost wet. When I told her my story, she listened without interrupting, then tapped the IOD with her pen. "I can't promise you a fairy tale," she said, "but this is a beginning. You have a recorded offer to dedicate along his frontage, a landlocked parcel, and a documented history of use. We can file for a declaratory judgment recognizing your easement by necessity or by prescription, and simultaneously ask the city to accept the dedication and issue an R permit for your driveway. 2 tracks. Redundancy is your friend when your opponent is a bully with money." "Redundancy is my friend," I repeated, because I've spent a life buying 2 of every prop lamp in case one breaks. "We'll need an ALTA survey," she said, "to overlay the track lines, the IOD alignment, and your existing driveway. And we need a paper trail of your usage and his interference, photos, dates, witnesses. Also, we should file a notice of pendency of action, a LIN pendens, so he can't transfer title cleanly while this is pending." I flinched at the word pending, but nodded. "What will he do?" "Smear you," she said. "File counter-complaints. Try to vacate the paper street if he figures out what we're attempting. Developers are allergic to anything that limits their curb cuts." "Curb cuts," I said, tasting the term like a foreign sweet. "Where the driveway meets the street," Naomi said. "Right now, his truck blocks your curb cut because he wants you to accept the inconvenience and go away. We're going to teach him what public interest means." We hired a surveyor named Gurdap, who wore a sun hat like a sail. He set tripods and prisms along the fence while Derek filmed from his porch like a citizen journalist of his own myth. Gurdeep hammered little orange flags that made my lane suddenly visible as geometry. When he finished, he laid plastic overlays across my dining table and showed me in laser lines what Aunt Lila's pencil had implied. The existing lane hugged the exact strip the IOD described, and my parcel, labeled Parcel B in someone's neat dead hand, had no access except this. Naomi filed our complaint downtown and stamped the Ellie's pendants. She also filed a request for a preliminary injunction to keep the gate open while the case proceeded. Derek's attorney responded with a declaration that read like I was a plague. "Ms. Russo routinely screams at my client. Ms. Russo trespasses. Ms. Russo's dog defecates on the shared area." That last one stung more than it should have. Daisy is a lady. The war was not just legal, it was daily. Packages went missing because delivery drivers saw the gate and didn't try. A plumber turned around and canceled because he couldn't get his van in. Once, at 3 a.m., Daisy began to bark so sharply I thought her old heart would split. I stepped onto the porch and saw a silhouette at the gate, a man in a hoodie filming my house through the chain link. "Get off my property!" I shouted, and the man ran. 5 minutes later, Derek posted to the neighborhood Facebook group asking if anyone else had noticed suspicious activity behind his house. I kept a log. Ray Delgado taught me that. Write it like a ship's captain. Date, time, event, witness. After 2 weeks, the binder bulged. I dropped off a copy of the log and a plate of cookies at Ray's counter. "You're doing it," he said. "You're turning a ghost into a road." Which is why the certified letter I received the next day hit like a brick. Derek had filed an application with the Bureau of Engineering and the City Council to vacate the paper street along his frontage. He wanted the council to extinguish the IOD as unnecessary, freeing his property of the ghost forever. A hearing was set before the Board of Public Works in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, which in city time is a blink and in a life is a storm. I stood in my kitchen, letter in hand, and felt heat rise behind my ears. If he succeeded, the city would give up its claim to the strip that was my only hope. The ghost would be declared dead. My runway would be gone. I called Naomi. So fast I pressed 911 by mistake and had to explain to a dispatcher that the emergency was bureaucratic. Naomi answered on the second try. "He moved," she said, "so we move faster." "How?" "We turn your story into a safety issue the city cannot ignore," she said, "and we bring friends." I thought of Javier. I thought of Marta. I thought of Aunt Lila, who never met a city clerk she couldn't win with lemon bars. "Then let's bake," I said. And as the oven warmed, a text pinged from an unknown number with a photo of my porch and the message, "TikTok." I looked across the fence. Derek's porch lights were off, but someone was laughing, all teeth and no sound, and the gate stood between us like a dare I could not refuse. I printed flyers that said, in bold letters, "Do not let them erase our road," and passed them out along Figueroa between Kitchen Mouse and the hardware store, where the bell over the door still sounds like 1958. Javier took a stack to Fire Station 12 and asked the captain to think about what it means to carry a gurney uphill while someone fumbles with a padlock. Marta brought her magnifying glass and her good cardigan to the Highland Park Neighborhood Council meeting and explained with a stubborn grace that made me want to hug her what a paper street is and why a city keeps them like seeds in a packet. Naomi wrote a legal memo that read like offense and defense at the same time, with case citations that turned my anxiety into a sharp thing I could hold. I set up a card table in my front yard, and for the first time since the gate appeared, I made my lane feel like mine. Kids signed the petition with crayon. An elderly man named Mr. Alvarez told me he used to deliver blocks of ice down this very strip when the house belonged to a woman with dishwater hair and a smile you could see across the street. A young couple with a stroller took photos of the gate and said they were sorry. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up. For every post Derek made about privacy and safety, 3 neighbors posted photos of ambulances that had used the lane over the years, and one woman posted a video of Derek's truck idling with its tires against my rosemary while Sloan filmed me from their porch, whispering that I was provoking them by carrying groceries. Naomi prepared the opposition packet to Derek's street vacation application like she was dressing a wound. Clean edges, numbered exhibits, photographs with dates stamped like little hammers. We included the irrevocable offer of dedication, the 1926 plat, photos of the gate, my log entries, and a note from the captain at Fire Station 12 on Monte Vista, on department letterhead, stating, in the polite language of professionals, that locked obstructions on sole access lanes are a hazard. Ray at Public Works said he'd make sure the Board of Public Works Commissioners actually read our packet, not just the summary. The Tial Diridailau. Before the hearing, I walked Daisy down to the corner and back 6 times to burn my nerves to ash. Sloan came out in white sneakers the color of surrender flags and watched me pass. "So much drama for a driveway," she said. "Drama is the thing you watch while someone else gets hurt," I said. "This is my life." She tilted her head. "You know what the difference is between you and Derek? I'm polite to waiters." "He wins," she said, and turned her face to the sun. The hearing was held at City Hall in the Board of Public Works meeting room, a place that looks like it was etched out of a Norman Rockwell painting and then lightly erased. 5 commissioners sat behind a long dais, staff clustered at a side table, and the public lined up at the back like we were waiting for communion. Derek wore a jacket the color of rain and a tie like a blade. His attorney's suit was the kind that announces hourly billing with a fanfare. I wore Aunt Lila's brooch, a brass leaf with a chip where time had bitten it. The Bureau of Engineering staffer read the item, a petition to vacate an unaccepted 20-foot wide strip along the eastern frontage of Lot 6, Track 3492. Applicant, Vale, Derek. Purpose, to consolidate yard and increase privacy. Staff recommendation, consideration pending public interest determination. Naomi whispered in my ear, "They haven't recommended approval. That's good." Derek's attorney went first. He called the strip an outdated, unbuilt artifact with no present utility, said my parcel had alternative access via steps to Avenue 51, which was a fiction I could disprove with one glance at my unbroken fence, and claimed the gate was a temporary safety measure due to loitering. He put up a slide of the neighborhood map and shaded the strip red like a wound. I spoke next. My voice trembled for the first 5 words, then found itself. I told them my name, my age, my aunt's name. I held up the photo of Daisy in her faded bandana and told them what it means to be 62 and carry a week's groceries up a hill because a neighbor likes the sound a lock makes. I passed out copies of the IOD and traced the dashed line with my finger. I quoted Ray's advice, "Paper outlives bullies." A commissioner with a neat bun asked me, "Ms. Russo, is this lane the only access to your home?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, it is." From the side table, a fire department captain in a dark blue uniform stood and cleared his throat softly. He was the one from Station 12, his posture saying he didn't do this often. "For the record," he said, "locked gates across sole access drives complicate response. We would prefer clear, unfettered access in the public interest." A murmur went through the room like wind through a grove. Derek raised his hand to speak in rebuttal. He pulled out a letter on city attorney letterhead, an email printed and highlighted in angry yellow from a deputy city attorney who had responded to a staff inquiry. Staff should consider the lack of acceptance of the dedication and any interference with the applicant's property rights, it said, in language that sounded neutral unless you heard it the way Derek did, which was as a green light. He laid the letter flat so everyone could see the seal. "Even the city attorney's office recognizes the issues here," he said. Naomi leaned in. "A deputy opinion like that isn't binding," she whispered, "but he's going to sell it like it is." The commissioners whispered to each other, a soft sea sound of deliberation. The chair thanked everyone and continued the hearing 2 weeks to allow for additional fact-finding and requested the Bureau of Engineering to report back on the IOD, the historic use, and any public safety concerns. 2 more weeks, 2 weeks for him to maneuver, 2 weeks for me to turn paper into a shield. We filed into the hallway. The elevator took forever. Derek stood close enough that I could smell his cologne like solvent. "You're getting your show," he said. "Enjoy it while it lasts." "This isn't a show," I said. "It's a lesson." "And I'm the teacher," he said, and as the elevator opened, he added, soft enough for only me, "Tick-tock." That night, under my porch light, I laid out every piece of paper I owned. I wrote a letter to the council office, CD 14, whose field deputy I'd met at a cleanup day, and asked for an appointment. I drafted an appeal to Ladbeth's about the code citations on my rosemary and old shed, and printed photographs of my tidy, low-growing plants like I was taking my garden to court. I wrote down a plan, signage, letters, witnesses, a demonstration. 2 days later, the demonstration arrived in the form of an actual emergency. A teenager on Avenue 49 set off a firework that ignited dry brush behind a garage. The engine from Station 12 turned onto Avenue 50 and braked at the gate like a bull at a fence. Alarms bloomed. I ran outside and waved my arms. "I can get it open!" I shouted at the captain through the whale. He shook his head and had his crew drag a hose around Derek's property, a long, exhausting loop that cost precious seconds. I filmed the whole thing with my hands shaking, not to shame the firefighters who were heroes, but to show what it means to lock a lifeline. When the smoke thinned, the captain met my eyes and nodded. "Send that to Public Works," he said, "and the council office, please." I did. And the next morning, as if the city itself had a conscience, a staffer from the council office called to say the council member wanted to understand the issue personally. "Bring your maps," she said, "and, if it's not too much trouble, bring any neighbors who remember how the lane was used." At Kitchen Mouse, over bowls of steel-cut oats and Too Strong, Coffee, Naomi, Marta, Javier, and I made a plan that felt like war and love braided together. It turned out that Mr. Alvarez, the Iceman, had a daughter who worked at a title company in Glendale. She pulled the chain of title for Derek's property and found an old acknowledgement from the Fenster days that referenced access for Parcel B to Yorkway along the existing drive. Yorkway, Avenue 50's older name, had sat in a drawer like a time capsule. We brought it all to City Hall, the photos, the plat, the fire video, the chain of title, the IOD, a petition with 312 signatures, and a cake from Antigua Bread because everything in government moves better with sugar. The council member's field deputy, her name was Alma, with a streak of silver in her hair she wore like a crown, listened, took notes, and asked quiet questions. "If the board accepts the dedication and issues an R permit for a driveway, would you be willing to sign a maintenance agreement? Keep it clean, keep the gate unlocked or with fire department access?" she asked. "I will plant roses in the cracks and blow the leaves off daily," I said. "I will make it beautiful. I will put a Knox box on the gate if they want one." Alma smiled. "Let's see what the engineers say," she said, "and I'll speak to our planning deputy. If this is in the public interest, we can sponsor a motion to accept the dedication." When we left City Hall, I cried in the parking lot, which is a thing I would not have admitted in any other decade of my life. I cried because there is a difference between begging and being heard, and the latter feels like oxygen. That evening, as if the universe wanted to balance my hope with a reminder of what we were up against, Derek's attorney filed a supplemental packet with the board, a survey stamped by a firm I had never heard of, showing the lane entirely within Derek's fee title, along with declarations from 2 neighbors who said they had never seen anyone use the lane but Derek's family. I recognized one of the signers as his contractor and the other as Sloane's cousin, who visited on weekends and parked across my curb. He attached an email from a deputy city attorney, the same one, saying that unaccepted dedications do not convey present rights. He printed it in a font so large it looked like a headline. Naomi paced in my living room, her finger pressed to her lips. "We need to neutralize that survey," she said. "Gurdeep, can you review their boundary and datum? I want to know what they hung their hat on." Gurdeep arrived with his tripod and a face set to stern. He unfolded Derek's survey on my table and traced the numbers. They used an assumed datum and ignored the record center line of Avenue 50, he said after 10 minutes. "Their bearings float, and they're coincidentally generous toward his lot line. I would not put my stamp on this." "Put your stamp on that sentiment," Naomi said. "We submit a rebuttal." I went to bed with exhibits in my head like sheep. I slept for 2 hours and woke to a sound that didn't belong, the soft mischief tremor of my back gate. I stood and called Daisy. No tag jingle, no toenails on floorboards. The porch light found the chain link shimmering, the padlock tilted like a grin, and the little loop of Daisy's leash hanging on the nail by the door empty. I stepped into the lane, barefoot, and called again. "Daisy!" The night swallowed her name. There is a particular cold that comes from a missing heartbeat in a home. I dialed 911, and then Javier. And then, shaking, I pounded on Derek's door until Sloane opened in a silk robe and blinked like an actress, surprised by paparazzi. "Have you seen my dog?" I asked. She put a hand to her sternum. "No," she said with performance pity. "Oh, Ellie, that's awful." From somewhere behind the house came the faintest rustle and a whimper. It could have been a raccoon. It could have been my life breaking. I stepped toward the side yard and Derek appeared, barefoot, with a flashlight beam like a knife. "Get off my property," he said. "Now." "Then open the gate and let me look," I said, "or I will stand here until the police arrive." The whimper came again, from the far side of the fence, behind his trash bins. I ran. He lunged to block, and Javier's voice came hot and clear over my shoulder. "Move, Derek!" The beam swung wild. For a second, we were all just 3 people in the wrong scene. Then the siren of a patrol car made the night crack, and I thought, whatever happens next will either save my life or make it smaller forever. And the patrol car screeched to a stop, the officers stepped out, and my name left my mouth like a flare. The officers' flashlights carved white wings out of the dark as they came around the hedge, hands open, voices careful because night makes every front yard a theater. "Ma'am," the older one said, eyes already moving for threats, "step back and tell us what happened." "My dog is trapped on the other side of his bins," I said. "We heard her whimper." "You are not entering my property," Derek snapped, planting himself square in the gate gap like an ad for entitlement. A second whine, thinner, desperate. The junior officer angled his light toward the trash cans, then listened. He looked at his partner, and the question hung between them. Exigent circumstances? A pet isn't a child, but a life is a life, and the whimper was the kind that takes up a room. "Sir," the older officer said to Derek, "we're going to take a look for the welfare of the animal. If you have nothing to hide, you'll unlock the gate." "Not without a warrant," he said, and Sloan made a small, high sound that was almost a laugh and almost a gasp. The young officer tilted his head, and the whimper came, again, muffled by metal. "We can see and hear a distressed animal," he said softly. "That gives us the latitude to check. Please stand aside." "Tick-tock," Derek whispered to me as he made no move, and something in me snapped that only ever snapped once, when a director told me I'd aged out of the business, and I took my paint chips and made a room so beautiful he asked for the colors for his own nursery. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for him. I raised my phone, tapped the Ring app, and pulled up the alert from 5 minutes earlier. A figure in a hoodie opening my back gate with a key, coaxing Daisy with a biscuit, slipping into the dark. He had underestimated the new camera Javier helped me wire to the Sycamore when the gate went up. "Officers," I said, angling the screen so their body cams could catch it. "This is footage from my camera of someone entering my yard with a key I never gave them and removing my dog." The older officer watched it as if watching a fuse burn. "Sir," he said to Derek, and now his voice had an edge, "if you don't open the gate, we will open it. Last request." A porch light snapped on across the street. Javier's voice carried low and calm. "I have this camera streaming to the cloud right now." Nailed down, preserved, the way you preserve facts on a stretcher when someone is dying. Derek stared at the officers, his jaw working, and for a moment I saw him the way lenders must see him when a deal goes sideways, calculating, not angry. If he made them cut the gate, he'd lose control. If he opened it, he could pretend to be the reasonable one later. He took the key from his pocket, forced a smile that looked like a pulled muscle, and turned the lock. The officer slid the chain free. We moved as a cluster into the side yard, me, the 2 officers, Javier hovering behind, and there, wedged between the trash bins and the fence, trussed loosely in a loop of twine so she couldn't run, was Daisy, my old girl, panting with a grateful, frantic little grunt. She licked the officer's hand like she was apologizing for being rescued. Sloan spoke first. "Oh, she must have slipped in. You know how dogs are." "We saw someone bring her," the young officer said, voice flat as paper. He pulled the twine away and lifted Daisy into my arms as if she were a 10-pound miracle. The older officer turned to Derek and said, "We'll be filing a report. Animal Services will follow up. Tonight, for everyone's safety, this gate stays open." Derek swallowed 1,000 words. "Fine," he said, but it didn't sound fine. He sounded like a man forcing a door that had already swollen shut. Back on my porch, I pressed my face into Daisy's neck and sobbed into old fur that smelled like rosemary and biscuits and fear, and for the first time since the 4th of July, I unclenched. Not much, just enough to let the air in. At 8 a.m., Naomi took the ring, clip, my incident number, and the officers' names, and sent it to the Board of Public Works with a supplemental letter that made my coffee taste like possibility. Applicant's pattern of interference now extends to removal of respondent's animal. Locked obstruction is no longer hypothetical risk, but demonstrable hazard. She copied the council office, the fire department, the city attorney's liaison. She is not a woman who whispers when someone shouts at her client. 2 weeks later, the hearing room was full. Word had traveled the way it does when a neighborhood decides it's tired of being quiet. Mr. Alvarez wore a tie the color of Los Angeles sky after rain. Marta brought her magnifying glass and her cardigan again, like a talisman. Ray from Public Works took a seat near staff and gave me a nod that said, "We're with you as far as paper can walk." Alma from the council office stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes alert. The bureau engineer presented first. He was careful, the way city engineers have to be, all facts and no mess. Staff located an irrevocable offer of dedication recorded in 1979 along the applicant's eastern frontage to serve the rear parcel. While the city did not accept the dedication at that time, the strip aligns with an existing driveway used historically by the rear parcel. Staff received documentation from the Los Angeles Fire Department stating concern about locked obstructions across sole access lanes. Staff also reviewed evidence of interference with access, including a recent police incident involving the removal of the rear resident's pet via the locked gate. Staff concludes that acceptance of the dedication would serve the public interest by ensuring emergency access and clarifying rights. Staff recommends the board request council to accept the dedication and authorize issuance of an R permit to the rear property owner for driveway improvements subject to fire department clearance. Derek's attorney stood so smoothly you could tell he rehearsed this in a mirror. The city attorney's office has indicated unaccepted dedications convey no present rights, he said, tapping that same highlighted email. The applicant seeks only to protect his family's safety. The rear owner has other options, walking in from Avenue 51, for example. He slid up a new Instagram slick rendering of a fence and hedge, the sort of image that pretends to be common sense. Naomi didn't bother with pictures. She brought receipts. Los Angeles has a long practice of accepting dedications when there's a landlocked parcel and a safety interest, she said, citing council file numbers like beads on a rosary. Easements by necessity are not Instagram-friendly, but they are the law. My client's parcel has no alley access. The alleged alternative access is fictional. The fire department has weighed in, so have the neighbors. The city can accept the dedication by council action and issue a revocable permit to control improvements and signage. The board's mandate is the public interest, not one applicant's inconvenience. Public comment spilled like a pocket full of marbles. A nurse talked about gurney widths. A UPS driver described backing down the lane to deliver oxygen tanks to the previous owner. Javier told the room about response times and the particular panic of a locked gate at 3 a.m. Mr. Alvarez's voice shook as he said, "I carry ice blocks down that strip for a lady named Fenster when I was a boy. The road may be on paper, but our feet made it real." When it was my turn, I didn't bring Daisy. She was sleeping at home with a belly full of boiled chicken. But I brought her collar, the old one with the worn leather, and the tag that says Ellie in case I needed a totem. "I'm 62 years old," I said, "and this lane is how I live my life. I've used it to bring home groceries, holiday wreaths, friends, and once, my aunt's hospice bed. I am asking you to choose lives over locks." The commissioners didn't talk much. They didn't have to. The chair asked the city attorney at the side table whether the highlighted email was binding. The deputy cleared his throat. "Those were informal comments to staff," he said. The council has the authority to accept dedications. The vote was unanimous to adopt staff's recommendation and transmit a request to council to accept the dedication and to direct the Bureau to process an R permit for my driveway with fire department conditions. It doesn't look like much on the page, 5 eyes, but I felt something old lift out of my chest, something heavy and shaped like fear. Derek kept his face arranged like a magazine page that had learned about loss, but would not admit it. In the hallway, he brushed past me and hissed, "You think you've won?" There's a tone men use when they realize the game won't be played on their court anymore. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the salt you rub into a wound to keep it clean. The council motion hit the agenda for a Wednesday, 20 days later, one of those banal lines that, if you zoom out, can rearrange a person's map. Alma had shepherded it like a midwife, accept the irrevocable offer of dedication of the city-owned strip along the east side of Lot 6, Track 3492, for driveway and emergency access purposes, instruct the Bureau of Engineering to process an R permit for improvements in signage, and authorize the Department of Transportation to post no parking fire lane signs as required. The City Council voted without debate, tucked into a consent calendar among a dozen other items about sidewalk repairs and tree trimming. Bureaucracy moves in whispers. When it speaks, lives change. A week later, a crew from the Bureau wheeled up with a grinder and a truck full of signs. They cut Derek's padlocked eyesores free and set them in the bed of their pickup like failed science projects. A white dot truck arrived, and a man in a safety vest bolted a bright new sign to a steel post. No parking, fire lane, tow away. He added a second sign at the curb. Russo Private Way. Authorized vehicles only. Revocable permit. RP 118742. I didn't ask for the name. Alma had suggested it, a way to make it clear the lane wasn't a theoretical geometry anymore. It was a place with a purpose. Ray met the crew with a folder. "Sign here," he said, sliding me the revocable permit paperwork. I was responsible for maintenance, fire department access via Knox box on the swing gate the city would allow at the rear, not the street. No obstructions, clear width, reflective striping. "Welcome to managing a tiny road," he said, and when I signed, my hand shook, not from fear, but from the solemnity of it, the way you sign for a delivery you ordered years ago and thought got lost. Naomi filed a stipulation in our civil case. In light of the city's acceptance of the dedication, we would narrow our request to a declaratory judgment confirming an easement by necessity and by long use. The judge signed an order granting a preliminary injunction. Derek was restrained from obstructing the right-of-way in any manner. A week after that, Animal Services issued a citation to him for interference with the possession of animal, a small violation, a small fine, but paper that didn't lie. There's a quality of silence after a fight that tastes like lemon rind, bitter and clean. The night the signs went up, I sat on the porch with Daisy's head on my knee and watched cars slow at the sight of official metal. They didn't know the arguments, the documents, the tiny wars in the cracks. They saw a rule and obeyed. Sometimes that's all civilization is. And because this is a revenge story as much as it is a survival story, I will tell you the rest. A lender's notice appeared in Derek's chain of title. My lis pendens had made his refinance crawl like a snail. His application to vacate the strip had spooked an architect who'd drawn a second unit plan dependent on the extra frontage. With the city's acceptance of the dedication, his lot's buildable area narrowed. His variance argument evaporated like mist. He filed an appeal to the Board of Public Works and withdrew it 2 days later. Sloan began running in the mornings, longer and longer, as if she were training for a race no one had announced. He tried one last flourish at the restraining order hearing, a video of me filming the fire engine and agitating, he said, for spectacle. The judge watched without blinking. "The court encourages people to document possible safety hazards," she said dryly, and denied his request. She granted mine for a mutual stay-away order, 50 feet of peace, enforceable. When Naomi asked for attorney's fees on the injunction, the judge granted them in part. The number wasn't huge, it landed like a parking ticket on a Porsche. But it was ink in the ledger. The day the city striped the lane with reflective paint, a little boy from 2 houses down rode his scooter up and down the fresh white lines and announced, "This is a runway." I told him, "It always was," and he laughed as if I'd told him a secret about the sky. I planted roses at the edge of the lane, iceberg, because they bloom more than they judge, and set a small bronze plaque in the dirt under the sycamore that reads, "Lila Lane, in memory of a woman who taught me paper can hold the weight of a life." The Knox box went up at the rear gate. Fire Station 12 came by to test it and left me a sticker that said, "Thank you for keeping access clear." I put it on the inside of my kitchen cabinet where the mugs live, so I see it every morning before the world makes demands. As for Derek, he moved differently after the signs, less like a king, more like a man walking on someone else's stage. A for sale sign didn't appear, too obvious, but an agent began bringing quiet couples in mat cars, whispering by the hedges while I watered. Once I caught a snippet. "Frontage is a little tight," the agent said with a smile that meant deal breaker. On a gray Tuesday in November, a moving truck nosed up to his curb. I watched from my porch as men carried out a life in boxes, labeled with black marker in a hand that had once written tick-tock on a sticky note. Under arrogance is always a calendar. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look at me. He wore sunglasses, though the sun was behind the clouds, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something like pity. Then the movers wrestled the yellow gate, a hulk the city had left on his side of the line for him to dispose of, into the truck, and the sound it made when its metal ribs hit the cargo floor was the same ugly clink his padlock had made on the 4th of July. My pity evaporated like spill on hot concrete. A new family moved in before Christmas, 2 teachers and a toddler who came over with a plate of cookies that tasted like they'd been made with actual butter. They asked a little shyly about the lane. I showed them the sign, the revocable permit, the Knox box, the white stripes. "We'll tell our guests," they said. "We'll keep it clear." When the toddler toddled to my porch and patted Daisy's head, Daisy closed her eyes as if she'd just remembered a long dream and found it wasn't a dream at all. Sometimes I still wake in the night and listen for locks. Trauma tunes you to little clicks. When I hear metal, even the good kind, the gentle sound of my mailbox, the chain on the porch swing, I feel my heart stand up and take attendance. Then I open the door and look down my lane, reflective paint catching whatever light the moon has to give, and I breathe like a person who can finally walk in a straight line without asking permission. If you drive down Avenue 50 now, you'll see a small sign you'll probably ignore, "Russo Private Way, authorized vehicles only, revocable permit." To strangers, it's bureaucracy. To me, it's a sentence that saved a life. On summer nights, when the neighborhood throws a block party, I string paper lanterns along the sycamores and set a folding table with cold lemonade and lemon bars cut into rectangles because circles feel too celebratory for the kind of victory earned by paper cuts and court dates. People wander in and out of my lane like it's always been theirs to borrow. That's what a right-of-way is, a shared promise. Once, I caught Alma standing under the sign, hands on her hips, smiling at the neatness of it all. "You know," she said, laughing a little, "nobody ever frames a council motion. You could be the first." I haven't framed it. I don't need to. I manscape it, sweep it, polish its meaning with a push broom. The revenge isn't the paper. It's the ability to walk, to drive, to live. The revenge is in the sound of an engine idling patiently as I pull out in the morning because a neighbor is waiting at the mouth of the lane, and they wave me through like I'm a queen. The revenge is the way people learned a new phrase, irrevocable offer of dedication, and the way they use it now to protect each other when someone louder than the law shouts "mine" on a quiet street. Some days I think about the boy on the scooter and on a whim, I chalked a line down the middle of the lane and a little arrow at the curb that says Lila Lane in a child's messy letters. The arrow points toward my porch, because why not? One afternoon, a woman stopped, read the chalk, and smiled. "Who's Lila?" she asked. "My aunt," I said. "She left me a runway." And if you're wondering about the ending, whether I saw Derek again, whether I ever got an apology, the answer is simpler than any courtroom speech. A year later, I was driving to the flower mart downtown early, the lane empty and proud behind me, when a black F-150 zipped by on Alameda and cut too close, and for a second, I felt the old anger reach up from the past like a hand through floorboards. The truck turned on 8th, and I lost it in the market's maze. I parked, bought roses and eucalyptus, and drove home on streets with names I loved: Broadway, Spring, Main, history layered on asphalt, lanes carved out of arguments older than me. I turned onto Avenue 50, slowed at the sign that has my name in clean, simple letters, and eased up the strip of road the city awarded as entrance to my private estate. I put the car in park, listened to Daisy's soft snore in the passenger seat, and looked at the white paint glinting in the morning sun. The world, like a theater set, is mostly flats and illusions, but every now and then you get to nail something down so hard it holds without a brace. I stepped out, set the roses by the plaque at the base of the sycamore, and whispered, "We're home." The chain that closes now isn't steel. It's a thin, bright line of quiet, and I keep it locked inside my chest where he can't touch it. The end.